Fantastic. All right.
Okay.
So I'd like to begin with a quote.
Okay.
I thought about it last night before going to bed. It is from The Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe, and it goes, "The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where one ends and the other begins?" Do you have any thoughts on that, Dennis?
Bring
a big can of worms.
Yes. Can you quote it again?
Yes. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where one ends and the other begins?
Well, I don't have anything profound to say. In a way, it's obvious. I mean, there's not a boundary between life and death. I think the time that we spend in a corporeal state is part of the journey. I don't know what your views about that are. Did we have a previous life? Do we have a life after? I think honestly, we don't know the answers. We have intuitions about this. But
well, I think, Dennis, that quote from Poe is really a reflection of the absolute obsession in the 19th century with the fear of premature burial. I got into that whole literature when I was looking into the zombie phenomenon. What is it about that frontier of death that is so intimidating by people? On the one hand, death is the first teacher. It's the edge beyond which life as you know it ends and wonder begins, and how people deal with that inevitable and inexorable separation defines their metaphysical worldview. I mean, my wife Gail is a devout Buddhist, and since COVID came on, she's been spending 5 hours a day online exploring the Bardo with her Sangha. And she comes out with these phantasmagoric accounts about what I better be ready to see when I die. And it reminds me a little bit of what my father said about every church. There should be a billboard outside saying, important if true. And but in the 19th century, this fear of premature burial was very, very common. And it reflects the fact that even in a clinical setting, it turns out there's no one single symptom or indicator that is foolproof when it comes to a diagnosis of death. The physician sort of looks at a constellation of things. And in the 19th century, it got so hysterical that there was a famous contraption called Count Karnitsky's invention, which you could either buy if you're rich or you could rent for a period of time. And this contraption was attached to the coffin so that if you happened to wake up in your coffin, there was a bell you could pull that would ring. There was an air tube that would bring you air. It was a complete Rube Goldberg contraption that people rented on a regular basis in Victorian Europe. And that fear of burial was all part of a kind of a whole complex of syndromes. And that's why I got onto it looking at zombies, because you had to ask yourself, what did it mean for a Haitian person to think of zombies? They believe in the fiber of their being that zombies existed. The fear in Haiti was not of zombies, like the movies say, but of becoming a zombie. So how could here was a people who I had witnessed, catapult themselves into spirit possession and handle burning embers with absolute physical impunity. Well, what did that tell me about the power of mind to affect the body that bears it? And I couldn't consider the zombie phenomena without considering the psychological fear of becoming a zombie. And that brought me into a whole literature on psychophysiological death and illness, which is actually a big deal around the world. And so that's, I think, what Poe is really talking about. He was really talking about not the metaphorical sense of what becomes us in death, but the real possibility that we might be buried alive.
Yeah, and with uncontacted and very remote tribes, a real difference I noticed between them and us in relation to this is, let's say we break our bow and arrow or our pot and we need it. We go to a store, we go to a friend, we go online. But they don't do that. if you break your bow, you talk to the ancestors who were dead and you tell your story to them. And then, as we would say, happenstance, you're walking down the path and along comes Wade with the exact bow he made. And I have the clay pot, which he's looking for. He goes, gosh, I need that pot. Oh, I need that bow. And we would explain that as happenstance. But what I found when you live for extended periods of time in those cultures, that type of happenstance between the ancestors, the dead, and the living happens all the time. It's just our mindset that doesn't allow that in as much.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm reminded of William Faulkner's quote, "The past is never dead. It isn't even past." Which is the epigraph or dedication of my book. That phrase just resonated with me. I guess it resonates with a lot of people. But, you know, our culture has a very peculiar relationship to death. You know, we fear it as a culture. And I think our medical practices, are a reflection of that. You know, so much effort is made on the part of medicine, so much effort is made to keep people alive, even beyond the point where it's clear that letting them die, letting them pass peacefully would be doing them and their loved ones a favor. And yet we spare no effort to keep people alive, no matter, what measures are implemented. I think this is one of the places where psychedelics can educate us. I think the work that's going on with psilocybin at the end of life to treat anxiety at the end of life points in a good direction. A direction, of course, which most indigenous cultures, they're way ahead of us on this. They realize that life has an end and that it's only a segment of existence. So they're not so terrified of dying. And I think that psychedelic experiences with psilocybin for people that are at a terminal state in their life can be immensely healing for them and their loved ones. And because our biomedicine just does not do death well, I guess is one way to say it. So much effort is devoted toward extending life, maintaining life at any cost. Very little effort is expended toward helping a person make essentially a beautiful death. And death can be beautiful. We all have to go through it sooner or later. We have a lot to learn from these traditions in how to approach that.
To have a good death.
A good death. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like we're almost dead while we're alive. Like we're alive, but we're searching outside of ourselves constantly for these quick fixes to feel okay. But it's because we avoid things that are right in front of our face that we fail to recognize what we have already. And if we could just appreciate and have faith in the way things are, then I feel like we'll get the abundance we're searching for through all these strange ways that we do as humans. Like we make things so complicated for ourselves. Yeah, we make things very complicated.
Very complicated.
Hasn't Corona brought everybody right to this point of thinking about the line of life and death? I think it's all very focused in us right now. People are afraid of death, yet they're afraid of life in a matter because they are. And I think we've all experienced the thing, the three of us, where you go to countries like Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, and there's ancient death cults there. But I never feel more alive than I'm in those countries. And here that we worship youth and everything is where I feel more like you're saying, just kind of lost and a little bit dead inside, Casey. It's funny how it's been reversed. I know in those places I just got back and I was so alive, and a week later Corona hit and I was locked down, and my mindset changed immediately.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes, I think one of the solutions probably, or one of the aspects of our feelings about death is we're always looking at the future. You know, at least in Western societies, we're not content to just exist in the existential moment. We're always looking back on the past or anticipating the future. And this is one of the things, you know, that the people that have undergone this end-of-life therapy with psilocybin, you know, if there's a take-home lesson, they almost always come away, the therapeutic effect is they almost always come away with a change in attitude. And they say, I was so anxious, I was so terrified of death, you know, so terrified of death that I had to seek this therapy out in order to come to terms with this, because it was making my life miserable. And you know, they come through that therapeutic process with the realization, you know what? I'm going to die, no doubt about it, but I'm alive right now. You know, I am alive now. And they can shift their focus to that, and they can get tremendous amount of peace and healing from that.
And from the time they have left, instead of being afraid, my mother's going through that right now. She's so afraid of death. She's not living her last, she's in her 90s. Her last time is right in front of her, but she's all consumed with death. And there's no way I can talk her out of it. You know, that's just
right.
where she's at.
And maybe some of these catalysts, you know, could help, but she's probably not open to that, which is a, you know, a shame for you, because you're her son and you know that you can help her with it. But
yeah,
the person has to have enough of an open mind.
Exactly, and there are lines, and not that she's more afraid of her fragility. I think if she didn't feel so fragile, she'd do that. But that leads me to a question to both you and Wade, because we've talked a little about it, and I heard you speak about it. When taking synthetic psilocybin at, you know, Johns Hopkins and all the experiments in making people relax with death, but it's a very different experience when you're in the jungle in a remote setting in a truly intact tribe, and you take ayahuasca or dishitu or a paini. Then the experience of life and death takes on a whole other dimension, I believe, than it does just coming to terms with the chemical. And I wonder if both of you have variations on that experience.
Well, I think it's obviously very different, a very different setting, a different set. But on the other hand, I think for a lot of people, there's a familiarity of the clinical setting that probably gives them a certain level of comfort. I don't know, Dennis would know more than I, that allows them to go through this process, which might, for some people, be initially a little bit daunting or experimental or even scary in and of itself. So whether or not those people would necessarily benefit from being in the middle of the forest, you know, in an uncomfortable new setting,
uncomfortable,
is not clear to me.
Certainly
for people like ourselves, Michael, who love that setting, you know, it's unimaginable almost for me to want to take these substances not in that setting. But I wouldn't generalize about that. I think what the kind of therapies that Dennis is referring to are opening an avenue for a great number of people who might not otherwise have that possibility, you know.
Yeah, very few can have that possibility,
Yeah.
and this is for people to get something out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's interesting. Oh, sorry, Dennis.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I think probably Wade and Michael and everyone on this forum agree that to be able to experience a psychedelic in nature and, you know, in a more ceremonial context than, you know, a clinical room in a hospital at Johns Hopkins. You know, it's not the optimal circumstance for this, but it is what is available right now, and you know, and they nevertheless they get the therapeutic effect.
And I would go far, Dennis. I'd go as far as to say that, I mean, I've taken ayahuasca in quintessentially traditional settings in Maloccas in Northwest Amazon with 200 men in ritual regalia in the middle of a 3 or 4 day ceremony.
Right.
It's not necessarily a comfortable place for one of us to take ayahuasca.
No. I would no.
You're minding your P's and Q's. You're on performance mode. You're not really relaxed. I mean,
Right.
They're biting you.
it's not necessarily ideal.
Yeah, no, I would not approach ayahuasca in that way. But I'm basically a lightweight. I can't take a 4-day ceremony. It would probably kill me.
But
What about the La Chorrera experiment? Wasn't that about a month?
It was a month, but it was not planned. Let's not even go there. Let's call it a misadventure of my life that I learned a lot from, but I would never want to live it again. I took the lesson and I moved on.
Yeah,
so I wouldn't want to do it again.
But are there even elements beyond, of course, set and setting really does play a part in this, but are there actually elements beyond set and setting? Because I know too, depending on the setting, the experience for me is very differently. But there are things that I've experienced out in the forest, and of course I was more acclimated to surviving it, that seem to be far beyond set and setting, something that Dennis spoke about in a scientific term when talking about the songs of the plants. And the way you were mentioning, I believe psilocybin it's so similar to part of endorphins and chemical consistency that you could actually see how they can communicate with each other, because I had known about the songs and the songs to the dead and the songs of each of the individual plants. But until I heard Dennis publicly speak about it, I wasn't aware anybody else was aware about that at all, except for maybe Wade. It's a phenomena of that world when you take those plants after a while and you know them. They have an actual specific song. And if you speak to a medicine person 20 years later in a different setting and you make that song, they'll immediately know what you're talking about. But I've never, ever known any shaman, curandero, bachi, to tell you the song. You get it directly from the plant, as you were saying, directly from the chemicals in them meeting up with each other.
We always talk, Michael, when people say that the shamans say that the plants speak to you. We always kind of dismiss that as if it's metaphor, but I don't think it's metaphor at all. I think it's quite literal. I think they really do believe and experience. I mean, it gets back to why it's so difficult to begin to discuss the subjective effects of these extraordinary substances, because rational discourse is not really what they're about. And if I tried to put into words subjective experiences that I've had taking huge amounts of San Pedro over a couple-day period, I mean, people wouldn't even begin to understand the language that I'm using, right? So when we say that, when Native Indigenous people say the plants teach us, I don't really think they're speaking in metaphor.
I totally agree. In fact, as I'm sure you've gone through too, you get to know people, because with me, everybody always lied for me to the first couple of years until I got in the village. In general, those people love to tell you stories when they first come in to kind of keep you away. But when I got to know people personally, it always came down to the same thing. I would ask, how did you figure out, Piaroa people, this incredible combination to make ayahuasca or yaque? And they'd look at me kind of confused and go, well, the plant told us how to do it. Not metaphorically, literally they mean they didn't do it by deductive reasoning and people dying, taking the combinations over a period of centuries, that the plant actually instructed them. And I have found that all through the Americas, true among it. I know with the Mazatec, they also believe that the mushroom actually tells you in its archaic language how it wants to do it. And I think that's kind of what I was bringing up before.
But you know, Michael, it makes so much sense because I mean, we're all children of the Enlightenment. Whether we like it or not, we were raised to think in certain ways, right? To not really believe that a mountain could be a deity, to not really believe there could be spirits in the forest. And no matter how much we would like to shake the constraints of that Descartesian worldview, it's very difficult because you can't think your way into faith. You know, you can't. At that level, it's very difficult to enter another cultural reality. But in these worlds that were not informed by that particular intellectual tradition, however you want to describe them, it's completely logical in that sense. If you take mushrooms, if you take ayahuasca, if you take peyote or San Pedro, you are in another dimension. You are hearing things, feeling things, sensing things, believing things, dreaming things that do not happen in this ordinary reality. And those voices, the plant does come on you like a voice, because everything you feel is coming from the plant. And so it's not difficult to understand how someone who was not within the shackles of Descartesian logic intellectually it would make perfect sense to say something as simple as the plants teach us, because it's their language, it's their voices. I mean, where else are people to believe that all those sensations come from? I mean, it's pretty obvious. You don't have them in ordinary reality. You take these substances and boom, you're there, and you hear all this music of the spheres or whatever, and then you come back and you're the same as you are. Well, what was the common denominator? It was a plant, so it's not like that unusual to me.
It's our mind. I think you're absolutely right. Our mindset, I know for me and probably for you, I really know I've changed over all these years and it's had an effect on me. But people say to me, have you become that? Absolutely not. There's always the doubt of the structure we brought up.
I think this is where, that's a really good point. I mean, one of the things that I try to be so respectful, when I was in Haiti, for example, afterwards, after the journalists would ask me, or people would ask me, did you get possessed in Haiti? Now, the Haitians used to always say that in these strange ceremonies that we went through, they said I was possessed, but I know I wasn't. And to me, the idea that someone from the north, black or white, could suddenly drop into this reality and try it on like a cloak would be a disservice and disrespectful to everything I believed about the culture. If I really did believe the belief system was so powerful that it could provoke these extraordinary abilities, like the ability to handle burning embers with impunity, well, then this wasn't a trivial tradition, and it certainly would have denied everything I was trying to say in celebrating that tradition if I had myself flaunted a kind of a casual ability to take on those capacities. No, the whole point is that these beliefs were in the fiber of the being of the people since childhood. That's how they were able to manifest in the physical plane. The power of the mind to affect the body that bears it was based on a very complex set of deep beliefs upon which individuals were nurtured since childhood. I couldn't just drop in there from Boston doing a PhD and suddenly become Dambalawedo. It was absurd.
And I think the plants too, they put on a type of carnival show, the lights and the flashing, that actually keeps you at a distance. It's kind of their way to mesmerize you. And to really get into that world, you've got to go beyond the carnival show and the psychedelic paintings and the transformations of geometric forms. And it's actually beyond that where the essence of it is, that it's almost a veil to keep those people at a safe place.
There's another issue here. I mean, all of us are capable of change. I mean, when I hear myself discussing things like this, all I can do is sort of express bewilderment as to how a little bourgeois boy from the suburbs of Montreal grew to have these thoughts, right? So it's not like you can't change your education and experience, but at the same time, one is a product of your cultural reality. That's where your ultimate fidelity is. And it's not easy to discard that. In fact, it might be a kind of a psychotic step to try to do so.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, this is why always try. I always try, both out of just sort of respect and decorum and discretion, whenever I'm in a kind of cross-cultural moment, whether it's a voodoo ceremony in Africa, a monastery in Tibet, or a shamanic ceremony in the Amazon, I always maintain a certain reserve out of respect, but also because I have so much respect for what they are doing, if you know what I mean. I'm just not sure how easy it is for us to slip into those worlds. And if you really did slip into those worlds, I don't know how you would come back from that world. You know, I think it's a passage that is fraught with obstacles and fraught with challenges and risks, frankly.
Do you and Dennis think you've actually fully come back from those worlds? I don't. I think I've left one foot in there.
I think I've become, absolutely, Michael. I think that I've become absolutely changed by this. This is why I always joke that, Dennis, when we're all young, our parents, don't take psychedelics, you'll never come back the same. And of course, that was the whole point, But so yes, we've all been changed, and I think we all would acknowledge, and I think we all ought to be acknowledging that the very positive role that these experiences played in our lives. But I don't think I could ever truly become a voodoo acolyte. I don't think I could ever truly I could be a Tibetan practitioner, but I cannot become a Tibetan monk, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah, I think it's the old the old saw. Heraclitus said, "You can never go down to the same stream twice," and that is the thing with psychedelics. I mean, the stream is not the same, and you're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So these things are unique, one-time experiences, which are complete in themselves. The next time you take ayahuasca or whatever the medicine is, you're a different person. The medicine is different. The circumstances are different. This is the uniqueness of time in a sense. In essence, every moment is unique. There will never be a moment like that in the history of the universe that's exactly like that.
I think, Dennis, as we speak publicly about these substances, I mean, presumably the reason we're doing this is not gestures of self-aggrandizement. It's because, and we're not necessarily proselytizing. It's just that I think that where these conversations are most helpful is to really stress in a gentle, reflective way just what good these substances can do for human beings. And, that's why I so happily say that I honestly don't think I would write the way I write. I don't think I would think the way I think. I don't think I would understand cultural relativism. I don't think I'd treat women. I wouldn't understand the natural world. I wouldn't come to terms with homosexuality in other men. I mean, it's just, these substances open doorways of intuition, sensitivity, openness, empathy that absolutely were essential in forging my character and my worldview. And I think, by no means am I a perfect person, but I certainly do think I'm a better man for having taken psychedelics.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I know, and as you say, we never lose it. I know I was in the bush for 2.5 years, and no matter what I did, and I was young, and I truly believe I'd crossed over into the other side. But the tip-off was whenever I got hungry, I dreamed of pizza. I was like, how does that come? Well, that's what that trigger was in there.
Right.
But again, Michael, this gets, too often these conversations are either, idealizing the exotic other or denigrating our own society. And that's hardly the point. I mean, we've all been in enough strange scenes around the world to know there is no idealized other. and nor are we in the business of reflexively denigrating our own tradition. We're all about what kind of world do we want to move forward into? How can we help forge a better world? How can we push the wheel of, goodness and decency and honor uphill? And God knows we're living in a time of forces arrayed to do quite the opposite. Just look who's ruling the roost in Washington, D.C. It's not about judgment. It's not about one intuition of life being better than another. It's about how do we, and of course, change is the one constant. All cultures everywhere are always dancing with new possibilities for life. I'm no more like my grandfather than a Haida brother of mine is like his grandfather. But the point is, how do we move the dial forward in a positive way? I mean, that's the biggest lesson I ever got from my father. He wasn't a religious man, but he used to say, there's good and evil in the world. Take your side and get on with it. And he also said, you're never going to win. You're not going to vanquish evil. I mean, that's a big delusion, I think, of Christianity, this idea that evil is this force that sometime and somehow we're going to overcome. And that's so different than the Eastern view of it. When Lord Krishna was asked, why does an all-powerful God allow evil to exist in the universe? When you ask that question in Europe, you were burned as a heretic. In the East, Lord Krishna said, why does he allow that? To thicken the plot. In other words, there's always been good and evil. And if you realize that you're not out to vanquish evil, but you're to be on the side of righteousness, if you will, or good, or however you want to say it, it also allows you to stay in the game longer, because you're not focused on a goal or a destination. The path you're on is your destination. The destination is not a place, but a state of being. And when you embrace that, and that is certainly something I learned from using psychedelics, then you can stay in it for the long term. You're not obsessed with the progression of time, as Michael spoke about his mother. You are just here in the moment, day by day, moment by moment, asking yourself, am I helping or am I hurting? It's as simple as that. And I think that's what allows one to live as long as we all have lived, without either one of us becoming embittered. And that's a remarkable achievement to reach our age and still be, doing our best to push that wheel forward and not being sulking in a kind of sea of miserable disappointment, looking back on a life of decisions imposed upon us. Or we've all been the architects of our lives, and that's the most creative thing a person can be. And one part of becoming that architect, one essential element, was the fact that we took these psychedelics in a very informative way.
Yes, I can resonate with what you say. I liked what, we are the architects of our lives, like it or not. And I think that the psychedelics are learning tools or teaching tools. They talk about the plant teachers. What do they teach us? I am, and you also have to ask, where does that teaching come from? Does it come from the plant? Or does the plant open a portal to a part of yourself that you did not know about, or you normally can't relate to? And it relates to you as though it were the other, but actually it's within yourself that this understanding is, from which this understanding springs. And then the medicine, the molecules, the psychedelic medicine is more like a lens than a teacher. You look through that at your life, at your existential situation from a different perspective. Just like if you go into the forest in a altered state, you're going to notice many things about your environment that you normally, they're filtered out, right? Because we know now from neuroscience and other sources that we actually construct a model of reality, and that's what we live in. And what that model, this is what our brains are programmed to do. And what that model, much of the model is about what it cuts out, what it filters out. so that what does get through you can make sense of. You know, otherwise you'd just be in a blooming, buzzing confusion all the time. The psychedelics can temporarily lower those barriers. They let you look at it from a different perspective, but you're always looking at your existential situation. You know, I mean, you can step out of yourself, not really step out of yourself. You can look at your existential situation from a different perspective, and you can learn a lot about that. But we're always immersed in what is essentially a human experience. And, you know, I like what Rick Doblin said. I think it was in the film Neurons to Nirvana. He said, people take psychedelics not to have psychedelic experiences. They take psychedelics to have human experiences. Mm-hmm. And it's an important distinction. Mm-hmm. They are tools for learning to be better humans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, you know, people would say, is the ritual experiences and the death experience. And of course, for the Mesoamericans, the Mazatecans with the mushroom, it's very much a journey through the underworld, through the Mictlan, to discover the self, to rise once again in the footsteps of the plumed serpent. But always the feeling I had is what you two were talking about. When the experience, the ritual came to an end, it wasn't so much I felt like I died, it came back to life. It was like, yes, I survived. You know?
Well,
right. I made it. You know?
That's interesting, Michael. I mean, that's very interesting, actually, because, I mean, we've talked often about how the kind of gestalt of ayahuasca has shifted. Certainly, every Native person I've ever spoken to about ayahuasca says just what you say, you know, only with different elements to be moved through. I mean, you know, when people talk about how cleansed and refreshed they feel about ayahuasca, I've always wondered if it's not, they just feel happy to be still alive. You know?
Exactly.
But I want to go back to what Dennis said, which I think, and quoting Rick, I think that's so profound, because when you think of it, for all kinds of historical reasons, you know, these substances have been sort of categorized as drugs, and then so they're, you know, with all that label implies, from, you know, dance floors and cocaine fests to gutters to whatever, or they've been sort of described as psychedelics, as if you're going to take them and have this sort of, you know, kaleidoscopic hallucinations. And people are always saying, I've never really had hallucinations or seen kaleidoscopes. And the whole language that we use to describe them is kind of trivializing what is the real essence and the purpose. And that idea that you take these things and to become a better human. And that's really, Dennis, what I mean when I look back and reflect and see what I think these substances did for me as a young man. They made me a better human being.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm a perfect human being by any means. And it doesn't mean that anyone who takes these will necessarily become a better human being, a great human being. But I think if you take them in the right spirit and with the right intention, it helps you to become a better human being.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think perfection is expected, or you know, it's not something to strive for, really. It's not that. It's about just how to live, how to express your being in the world in the most beautiful way and most compassionate way that you can. No one asks for perfection. You know, mm-hmm. it's unachievable, and mm-hmm. would we even know it if we saw it?
Right.
You know, it's a matter of, do you live your life in a full way that is fulfilling for you and the people around you? That's where the magic of psychedelics come in, because I think it helps us to realize essentially we're all one. You know, that cliche, right? Mm-hmm. We're all one. We are not separated. We can say that over and over, but until we experience it, it doesn't have to be psychedelics, but that often comes that way.
It's making us experience that we're all one. I think it's making us realize we're all in this struggle together. And I wonder if your backgrounds with these plants has given you any, you think, possible insight into what, through the psychedelics, into what's going on now, which I really see is a life and death struggle. You know, it's it's brought up so many questions I know in myself and everyone. And I know speaking to Wade one time, he made a comment. He said, do you, when you do these things, do you go into nirvana and feel like a shaman in elated bliss? I said, boy, I think one time, really long time ago, for a minute, I felt that. But Wade said, usually I feel like I'm getting, if I quote it right, torn away from a she-jaguar's tit and thrown into a pit of service. I said, that's closer to how it goes, actually.
Right, exactly.
We're getting close to an hour. Just want to be conscious of time here.
I've got to get on to some stuff too.
Awesome. Yeah, it seems like psychedelics can help us get out of this strange box we've got ourselves trapped in. It's almost like a self-proclaimed God syndrome. We believe that we're the center of everything and we have the right to tailor our environment to our every need, but that doesn't make any sense at all because we depend on the things that we use. So if we rip everything dry and have no understanding of what's providing this for us and not giving it any credit, then it's bound to not be receptive and not like us that much, you know? So if we can begin to have relationships with plants in general, like food, the houses we build, all those things.
Well, I think a big thing, Casey, is, you know, that in our European intellectual tradition, as I mentioned earlier, you know, going back to the Enlightenment, we de-animated the world, and that attitude resulted in an extractive, exploitative model that we didn't really pause to critique. And for 300 years, literally driven by our consumption of the ancient sunlight of the world, that paradigm has been both successful and dominant, but its dominance shouldn't imply that it's the norm. And as I said, the norm around the world is one based on reciprocity, exchange, and that sense that you're just one of many sentient creatures, that observation, the Bodhisattva feel that plants are just people in another dimension of reality. Well, those kinds of what to a strict Descartian would be either silly or threatening notions are intuitively obvious when you're taking these substances in the forest, right? So why am I, a product of a bourgeois background in Canada, truly able to understand what it means when the Bodhisattvas say we become the ancestors and journey to the points of origin, and they're not speaking in metaphor, or when they say that they really do speak to the jaguar master, or that they go beneath the water to the haze spirits, or just the entire idea that plants and people and animals are related at some deep level, which of course we know biologically to be absolutely the case in terms of genetics. But that idea became completely acceptable and intuitively understandable to me in good measure because I took psychedelics. And it was psychedelics that took me from that little boy playing Little League baseball in Point Claire to, you know, a 17, 18-year-old lad seeking his destiny, rambling through the forests of the Amazon in 1974.
That's exactly what happened to me. I was playing baseball just like Wade, and then all of a sudden I took LSD in '65 and everything changed. And the next thing I knew, I was in the jungle seeing life through very different eyes. So I really feel that it has an awakening power, but I think with everything that has a great power, there's a great danger. And I think part of our conversation is trying to help, if we can, that in all the different aspects, the work with people's traumas from civilization and death fears is very important. Our reclaiming to the plants, because I guess in evolution they say we started out a worm to a lizard to a crocodile to a monkey to this, but maybe it goes back further that we started as plants. This is really their planet, and we've kind of come into the game here. So our lineage goes back to all living things. We're all part of this cycle together, and maybe at this time in history they're reaching out to us, and maybe the plants who appear to just be in our European culture, background scenery and hedges.
Mhm.
Maybe they're just playing it easy and they're really running the game. They got way more power into the whole situation on Earth because the weakness of civilization, the Achilles heel, is we don't communicate with nature, and it's the plants who are the means and maybe the bridge for us to do it again.
Yes, this is the crux of the problem, and what you're saying is this is exactly my shtick. This is my message. If there is a message that yes, actually the plants and maybe the fungi, but certainly the plants are running this show. And I have been forcibly reminded of that by ayahuasca on a number of occasions, sometimes gently, sometimes not. But the basic message is, you monkeys are not running this show. You know, the plants are running the show. And objectively, from a scientific point of view, if you think about it, they are in fact running the show because they are the part of life on Earth that brings energy from space in the form of sunlight and through photosynthesis, which is a very well understood process, nonetheless is rather miraculous when you think about it, manages to turn sunlight and carbon dioxide into complex organic compounds, such as the compounds that we are made of, for instance, and every other living thing is made of. So the plants, I think, consistently in my own ayahuasca experiences, the lesson that comes through is remember you're not running the show, and remember you don't even know what the show is exactly, and just there's no room for arrogance in terms of what you know, because we don't know anything. Remember how little you know. That's consistent.
Dennis, when I was with Tim Plowman, after 15 months, we were going our separate ways, and we were very good friends, and we celebrated our separation with this enormous, what your brother would have called a heroic dose of San Pedro. It was sort of a new species we had found, and I spent hours staring at a single blade of grass propping out of the desert of the coastal Peru. And I had this revelation, and Tim just stopped me in time because I was going to send a telegram to Schultes saying, "Dear Professor, we are all just ambulatory plants. Your student Wade." Thankfully, I think Tim cut me off at the pass. Okay, you guys. Nice talking to you, Michael. It's great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you, Wade.
Okay, man.
Love the movie, by the way. Senderos are fantastic. The cinematography, I still can't figure out how you shot that. What a masterpiece.
Yeah, wonderful. Drones, the answer. Will Vela, genius. Okay, everybody. Thanks, Casey. Dennis,
thank you very much.
Wade.
Probably,
Wade, do I see a stack of your new book behind you there?
Well, it is, but it's not out yet. It's coming out in September. They just printed it.
Now it's September.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the world awaits it, man. We're all eager to see it. So.
Okay.
You'll
get the first copy I get. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye. All right. Ciao.
See ya. Thank you.
See you. Yes.
All right.
Casey, you're like a ghost.
Woo.
It's like talking to you. Were the ghost among us because your image on the screen is very ghostly.
Thank you very much, Michael, for joining in.
My pleasure. It was really wonderful. I thought it was really a great moment. It was really a jungle campfire conversation. I loved it.
It was, yeah. Right on the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, Case.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Oops.